Chuck Todd is NBC News chief White House correspondent, host of the Daily Rundown, and has been riding the Obama bus tour through the Midwest. And also with us, Dan Balls, national political correspondent at the Washington Post, who has been all over Iowa himself on Rick Perry. So first of all, Chuck, what do we know about what the president is planning to unveil? We understand it's right after Labor Day. And how will this be different from what we've heard before?
Well, as Jay Carney described it to me earlier this morning on Daily Rundown, think of it as two plans, I was told. So there's going to be a jobs plan, and he's going to do it all in one speech, but a jobs plan that puts together all in sort of one form all of the pieces of legislation that he's been pushing Congress to pass over the last month. So it's the patent reform, the trade deals, the infrastructure bank, and then a few more new details, I'm told, and their code word is that traditionally have had bipartisan support. Most likely would be things like transportation projects that usually do get more bipartisan support, trying to take requests that have come in from Republicans for some government spending, specific government spending, and lump that all in together. And then a few other details they say that they're still coming up with and they'll be working on over the next week. And then the second plan, if you will, is the debt plan. His plan that he wants to give the super committee for the deficit reduction deal. And what Jay Carney said is it will be basically inspired by the last deal that Obama and Boehner almost cut, right? The one that included remember, John Boehner himself went on the floor of the House and said, I put revenues on the table. Though the revenues that he would have agreed to, supposedly, and the entitlement reforms that the president supposedly was ready to agree to, that would be the plan they would submit to the super committee with much bigger numbers than just a cut of $1.5 trillion, Andrea.
And Dan Balls, you were traveling in Iowa. You were with Rick Perry. You heard the kind of raw, red meat that he was throwing out there to voters. How will that play in a general election context? And what about the reaction we've seen from, John Podhoretz and some other traditional conservative Republicans who are not at all happy? And I'm not just talking Karl Rove.
Well, I mean, it's an important question for Governor Perry that he will have to answer. I think the president was right. This is his first trip out as a presidential candidate, and he's been expected to be at the top of his game. And there are moments, as we've seen this week, where he was not at the top of his game, or not at the kind of top of the game you need to be as an effective presidential candidate. I think the important question short term is, what does he learn from this first trip? As he was more subdued yesterday, and he was more subdued today when talking about the Federal Reserve. So he's obviously learned at least a short-term lesson. But the larger question is, does he export out of Texas to the rest of the country? I mean, his whole political style in Texas has been to focus on the Republican base, and that is a successful formula in the state of Texas. It is obviously a more conservative state than many of the states that he would have to try to win in a general election. So, I mean, there are really two questions. One is, how effective a candidate is he going to be to win the nomination? What kind of a primary candidate he's going to be? And the second is, if he were to win, would he be able to make the transition to be a national candidate?
One of the things, though, yesterday, when his advisors were telling reporters, well, he's going to tone it down a little bit, or suggesting that he'll be a little bit more careful. But when he was asked about Ben Bernanke and the Fed comments, he said, I'm passionate about this. He was not backing down. He does seem to have toned it down a little bit today. But this seems not just rookie mistakes, if you will. It seems to be that he really believes in this stuff, and that the language he uses is the language he's comfortable with. It seemed to be more tactical.
Well, I think he's totally comfortable with the language he uses, and I think the way he talked on Monday night in Cedar Rapids is exactly the Rick Perry the Texans have seen for many, many, many years. He is that style of politician. I don't think he's going to be able to, change his persona or personality, nor probably should he. I mean, he is who he is, and if he tries to change that, he'll be less effective. The question is, as we've seen, how much reaction there will be, even among Republicans, about some of the language he uses. I think it may be more the language he uses in some of these cases than some of the positions. I think in a Republican primary, a lot of what he's saying is quite popular. But the question is, will he say it in a way that, while it might work in Texas, Texas. The idiom of Texas, does it work more broadly?
And Chuck, one last question. Jonathan Alter, our colleague, is reporting, tweeting out that Chris Christie has started with some focus groups. Do you think that the Rick Perry launch has caused some rethinking of Chris Christie and reopening that door?
Well, I can tell you that it's not just the launch now, but over the last 3 weeks, as the run-up to the Perry campaign, that you have this group of unaffiliated businessman Republican donors, sort of part of the establishment wing of the party that is not sold on Mitt Romney at all, was curious about John Huntsman, but unimpressed right now with Huntsman, that had continued to call Chris Christie, as far as I'm aware of, and the reporting that I've been able to do, and he picks up the phone. He gives him the same answer. I'm not interested in running, but he keeps picking up the phone. He keeps talking about it. He could be open to it, and I think nuggets like this don't surprise me, and neither did, for instance, the Paul Ryan news, where he went from, I'd say, 95% no to 80% no, according to the folks that I've been talking to.
Chuck Todd and Dan Balls, the best in the business. Thank you so much, my friends. And Jonathan Alter will be on in the next hour.